Hey, y'all, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we're going to continue our discussion about energy, specifically light energy, and we'll start talking about sacred geometry because, as explained in the last episode, geometry is how light organizes itself in the universe. Okay. Now, along with astronomia, which is astronomy and astrology combined, and numerology, sacred geometry is an ancient science that looks at energy patterns and how they form and connect everything in this manifested universe. So, everything in this universe is created using one or more geometric shapes, which we will discuss in this series. But first, let's just start by getting a solid foundation and definition of what sacred geometry is and why it's important to understand energy. Okay. Now, Elaine Makuzik, who does a lot of sound therapy research, which I'm going to connect these two concepts at the end of the episode, describes sacred geometry as the blueprint of the natural world and the basis of all forms. Sacred just means spiritual. Geo just means earth. And matri just means to measure. Okay. So it's literally translate to the spiritual measure of the earth. Okay. Now, geometry comes from this Latin word geometria, which again is just the measurement of the earth. So this was the primary use of geometry in the ancient world. So let's dig into that. And I bet you can probably guess by now, sacred geometry can be traced back to ancient Egypt, like most things. Okay, they were an advanced civilization, and they believed that geometry was a fundamental part to understanding the soul and our inner world. Just let your soul glow. They believed it to be the structure of awareness, and they assigned a deity to it like they did most things because they personified certain archetypes and they worshiped certain sciences. Okay, so the deity was the deity of measurement, he was the deity of the recorder of time, he was the deity of wisdom, alchemy, witchcraft, divination, and writing, and they called him Tahuti. Now, Tahuti is who we consider to be Thoth. And the Greeks called him Hermes, which again just translates to the recorder of time, and the Romans called him Mercury. Now, the ancient Egyptians used to use sacred geometry to survey the land before 10,500 BCE because the Nile River would overflow each year, which would cause havoc in their land and which would basically throw off their central government. Now, if you watch the astral worship video, we actually talked about the Nile River and how they used to use the Nile River, and how high it would rise or how low it would fall to determine whether or not they would experience abundance and prosperity, or they would basically have famine in the land. Okay, so as you can see, the Nile River was used to gauge a lot of things, and it was an integral part of their civilization. Okay, so every time that the Nile River would overflow, all of the boundaries that they had put in place would be destroyed. And these boundaries were an integral part of their government because they had implemented taxation, and these taxations could not be accurately enforced if the appropriate boundaries were not established. So every time this river would overflow, they would need to reestablish these boundaries so that there would not be any disputes about taxation. So basically, this led to them creating a system out of necessity, but it was based on pure research. It was based on observable data, and it was based on evidence. And they wanted it to be very simple, and they wanted it to be easy to practice because the Nile River overflew every single year. And because it would overflow every single year, they would have to do this every single year. So they created a system to help them do that. So in order to measure, they would need a very long rope. And what they would do is tie knots in this rope that were equal distant apart. Okay. And then they would need two men who were knowledgeable about what we would call Pythagoras' triangle. And yeah, you heard that right. Centuries before Pythagoras was even born, the Egyptians already had this knowledge. Okay, that's why I say no thought is original. We tune into frequencies on the mental plane based off of where we focus our intention, and we start to receive downloads based on where our focus is. Okay, now I talked about Pythagoras in the Astronomia episode, and I talked about how he journeyed across the world to learn about mathematics. Mathematics just translates to that which is learned. So mathematics just meant back then to study. Okay, so he actually went to Egypt and he studied, and that is where he stole this information. And I'm going to say it plainly like that. At first, when I was doing this episode, I was going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the book that I read about this, it's very, very clear that it was stolen because they were not the only or Pythagoras wasn't the only person to come over into Egypt and steal their information, burn down their libraries, and then rename their information as if it was theirs. Okay. If you look at the history of these people, you would not be surprised. This should not surprise you that things were stolen and renamed and reclaimed. Okay. So this information was actually stolen from Egypt, and they had this information centuries and centuries before Pythagoras even walked this fucking earth. Okay. So the pharaoh who was around during the time of Pythagoras was called Pa-Neter-Netjeri Ket, which I hope I did not butcher that, but I'm probably sure I did. But he was a prominent pharaoh in the third dynasty, and he created the Step Pyramid, which is supposedly the oldest monumental architecture that we know about. But he also had knowledge of Pythagoras' triangle. They called him multiple names, so he was either Dozier, Soser, or Zoser. And I'll put those names on the screen. I also put a picture up of him. There's only statues of him that have the nose broken off. We know why they did that. But there's not a lot of pictures of him because, again, this was so fucking long ago. Like, how will we even get that, right? But yeah, that's supposedly who was in charge during that time, and that's who the information was actually stolen from. Okay. Now, if you don't believe that they had information on Pythagoras' triangle, there is a book that's called Science in Ancient Egypt, and it's by Geraldine Woods. On page 36, it says, early on, the Egyptians discovered that a triangle measuring 3, 4, 5 or 5, 12, 13 would always include a right angle. By siding with a right angle and constructing an imaginary triangle, surveyors could determine distances. Okay. Now, if you know anything about Pythagoras' triangle, one side is 3, one side is 4, one side is 5. Okay. The 5 side is the hypotenuse, that is across the angle that is across from the right angle, or it could be 5, 12, 13. Okay. So that's what that's basically saying. So back then, they used to measure everything in cubits, which is the length of a man's forearm from his elbow all the way down to his middle finger. Now, this is really cool to me because it shows that we are perfectly designed, which you should already know that, because if you look at the human face, right, or you look at our ear, if you look at the distance between, again, like our arm, our elbow to our finger, it's the phi ratio, and the phi ratio is the ratio of perfection. It's the golden mean. Okay. So we are designed very perfectly, and they knew this, and they were using this to help advance their civilization. Other measurements that they would use would be the width of the palm and the width of 4 fingers held together to measure as well, which I think, again, is cool because I've seen people actually do this in like today's time. So maybe that's something that we just pick up on. Now, they didn't just use anybody, though, to get these measurements because all of us are created differently, obviously. So they would use the pharaoh to do this and create measuring sticks that were labeled based on body parts. We call them pharaohs, but they used to call them Arfati.
What?
I'm gonna put it up on the screen, y'all. Y'all know I am good for fucking some shit up, okay? Words be eating me up. Arfati. I don't know. I'm gonna put it up on the screen. Y'all can see it for yourself. But they would use the pharaoh's body to create measuring sticks so that they could measure whatever needed to be measured. Okay. And they would also weigh things using grains of wheat and stone weights. Okay. And they would do that by using the Eye of Horus, which has specific fractal points, which I've shown you guys before. I'm going to put up a picture so you guys can see it again. But they would basically use the symbols in the Eye of Horus in order to determine the weight of something, which I thought was really fucking cool. Talk about innovation. So the ancient Egyptians would also design areas or do a layout for areas using an accurate method to produce right angles. So they would mark off a rope with 13 equal parts. 4 parts would be for the right angle of the triangle. 3 parts would be for the other side. And then the 5 units form the hypotenuse, which, again, if you remember from math class, is opposite of the right angle. And no surprise here, but we still use these methods today. So it was also used when they were building those fake temples for the gods, and they were collecting the offerings and the golds and the flowers for the gods that did not exist. Yeah. They also used this information to design those temples and those buildings because the Egyptians actually built temples for their gods as well. Using this method, again, they stole their information so that they can build houses, temples, churches, mosques, whatever. And The Egyptians did the same thing, but theirs wasn't like the frauds, and I'm gonna call them the frauds. Theirs wasn't like that. They actually made temples for their gods, but it was a place for them to go to worship, because they literally worshiped everything. Everything was an act of worship for them. But nobody could really go in these temples except for the pharaohs or the high priest. They were the only ones allowed to visit these temples because they were considered to be holy ground, or what they would call Quadash or Quadush. If you don't know what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about the frauds, again, go to the astral worship episode. I'm telling you, it'll make more sense. All right. But from this method, they laid out rectangles, squares, and other geometrical shapes. Okay. So this method was used not only for triangles, but to lay out a lot of different geometrical shapes. Okay. Now, contrary to what we have been taught about ancient Egypt, they had very advanced sciences like math, irrigation, astronomy, schooling. Like their civilians went to school, farming, hunting, temples, and they had tomb art and geometry as well. They also held symbolic ceremonies and magical ceremonies, all of which were stolen from them. Their libraries, again, like I said, were burned to the ground and their knowledge was stolen. And it wasn't just one group of people. It was the Greeks, it was the Turks, it was the Arabs, it was the French, it was the Canaanites, who are also called the Phoenicians, and they're also called the Hyksos, and it was the Hebrew Israelites. Okay, so it was several different civilizations that were coming into their land, stealing their land, burning down their libraries, stealing their information, and then making it seem as if they had discovered it when it was something that did not belong to them. Sound familiar? Like a broken fucking record. Okay. And we actually talked about this a little bit when we talked about Alexander the Great. He was a Greek who wanted land in Egypt and a stronghold in Egypt. So he went and stole land to make Alexandria, which is right on the coast. He didn't just steal any land. He stole prosperous fucking land for himself. And then when he passed away, he gave it to Ptolemy. So it was a common thing that they did back then. They colonized. And if you know anything about the Phoenicians were colonizers. They went to different lands. They were travelers, right? And they would go to different lands. They would, figure out what the people had, and they would create fucking havoc. Okay. So a lot of ancient sciences, like I said, can be traced back to Egypt, which was formerly called Tamari. And it's not where you actually think it is. The Nile River is not the river that you actually think it is, but I digress. Okay. If you want proof of this geometry, or you want to just look it up yourself, okay, you want to look up the symmetry and the organization of their structures, go look at the design of the pyramids of Giza, okay, because they were designed using the phi ratio. You can also look at the design of any of their temples, and you can compare it to other temples. Whatever you want to do. I honestly suggest you go look at it though, because I did, and it is astonishing the shit that they knew back then. And it gives you a idea of like just how advanced these people were. Okay. So let's talk about modern sacred geometry, and like its definition. So today, when we say sacred geometry, we're talking about sacred geometry being the underlying geometry in nature, referring to shapes and patterns found in the natural world, such as fractals, recurring patterns, and ratios. It is also described as the geometry of consciousness, revolving around the idea that all consciousness, including human consciousness, is solely based on sacred geometry. That is why this is so important. Now, sacred geometry is the graphical display that lets you express and share between different cultures. Okay, this came straight from Google. Now, let's talk about some of the components of sacred geometry, its relationship with numbers, and then we'll talk about like why it's important. Okay. Now, geometry is the combination of numbers and shapes. Every shape corresponds with a number. So I'll explain the first two kind of in deeper detail, just so that you can understand. I just need to lay the foundation a little bit. I'll put pictures on the screen. But this is the intro episode. Okay. So I'm not going to go super, super deep, because I'm going to do separate episodes for each one of these, and I'm also going to do separate episodes for each form of sacred geometry that we find in nature, like the flower of life, the seed of life, the torus field, etc. Okay, so the symbol for the number 1 is a circle, which is the shape that all other shapes come from. Okay, inside of the circle is a 0 point, which is finite, and it has infinite points around the circumference of that circle. So the 0 point is going to be the very center of a circle, right? And then there's a circle around it, which is the circumference. You can place a dot on any spot on that circumference. You have infinite opportunities or points to do that, okay? Nothing in this world exists without a center point. Now, bear with me as I try to explain this concept, okay? So, the way that consciousness works is also like this, okay? So, imagine that you're starting out with nothing, just a pure void, okay? Then the void becomes aware and wants to become more than what it is, okay? So, then the awareness is going to be at the very, very center of that circle. The first thing to develop around this awareness is a circle, because you become aware of what is around you 360 degrees in close proximity to you. All right. Now, the awareness is at the center of the circle or space that it is now aware of. It can now move to the edge of this circle, any point on that circumference that we talked about. It has infinite possibilities to move on this circle, on the circumference, right? And then once you move, say you become aware of what's around you 360 degrees, you move in the direction of whatever it is that you became aware of. Now, where you're standing is different from where you started. So your awareness gets bigger because now you are aware of 360 degrees around that. I'm going to put a diagram on the screen because it's going to be so much easier for you to understand this. Also, I recommend watching the episode of Spirit Science on Sacred Geometry, because they also show a diagram of this, and it's really, really great. And it really helps you understand how you become conscious of things. Our consciousness is very small and limited. And think about when you're born, you're only aware of your immediate family, right? And then as you get older, you start to become more aware of things. You got to go to school. And now that you are at school, you're aware of everything that's at school. And then you go to church, and now you're aware of everything that's at church. But all of those things are connected, but different, but separate, okay? So they're all points on this infinite circumference that are in the center. Now, when this keeps happening, right, this starts to develop the flower of life, which is something we'll talk about just a little bit later, okay? And one thing I would suggest that you do, if you haven't already, is try to draw the flower of life. Literally get one of those things. I forgot what it's called, but it's like a little compass, right? And it looks like this. And it helps you to draw a perfect circle. So I would literally place the dot in the middle, draw the perfect circle, right? Move to a point on the edge of that circle, place that dot there. That's going to be your new center. Draw another circle equidistant and do this. And once you get to 6, you will start to see the flower, right? And then just keep drawing this. As you draw this, you start to gain more knowledge. You start to become aware of more things, high level spiritual information, okay? So if you haven't already, please draw it for yourself. I'm telling you, it works tremendously. Now, the next is the number 2, which is represented by the Vesica Pisces. So if you don't know what this is, if you remember from school, when they want us to compare two things, they would make us draw 2 circles that overlap in the middle. We called it a Venn diagram, but that is the Vesica Pisces, okay? Vesica Pisces, or the number 2, is when polarity comes in and when polarity is created, because now we have 2 opposites that are really the same thing, okay? So if you draw that circle, you plot that circle, and you draw the second circle, I would just say, kind of like a Venn diagram, you can see how those things are connected but different, okay? Also, you know how Christians have that Jesus fish, and most people get it tatted because it's like a symbol for their faith. This is actually where it comes from, this Vesica Pisces, okay? Now, Jesus is the sun, and the sun represents the soul of God, okay? That center point where you see that fish is actually where the let there be light part of the Bible comes in, because that's where light is first produced. Now, 3 is called the triad, 3 in 1, which is where the first triangle forms, but it's also where we get mind, body, and soul. Okay, I'm going to put up a picture so you can see how the symbol for mind, body, and soul comes from this triad. Okay, the triad is called the firstborn. 4 is the tetrad, which is where the first cube comes from, square comes from, and 3-dimensional space forms. So this is also where we get the 5 platonic solids as well. 5 is the pentad, which is where life itself forms. This is where the 4 elements are joined together by the 5th element. This is also where we get the Fibonacci series. This is where we get phi, or the golden mean. The spiral actually comes in here, which is the symbol for moving energy. We also get fractals, which is as above, so below here. The Fibonacci spiral and the golden mean appear everywhere in nature. Okay, that's why this is so important. Most plants have 5 leaves. The human body, our face, our arms, our ears, animals, snowflakes, the sunflower. I could go on forever. Like, the Fibonacci spiral appears everywhere. Seashells, turtle shells, like literally you can find this everywhere in nature. Okay. So that's where the 5 is. All right. 6 is the hexad, and this is where we get structure, function, and order, or space, time, and power. This is where we get 12ness, which is seen so much in nature. This is called the 6 double. And then we have 7. Now, 7 is the heptad. Now, this is called the virgin or the holy number because it can't be created using the Vesica Pisces. Okay. It can't be created using a compass, a straight edge, or a pencil with accuracy. It can't be divided or produced by any other number within the decad, which is 10. Actually, nothing in nature is 7-sided, yet we see it everywhere because it creates rhythm in nature. Okay. 7 chakras, 7 days of the week, it creates rhythm in nature. All right. Now, 8 is the octad, which brings you back to the beginning. It's peace and stability. It relates to the moon, wholeness. It relates to cycles. It relates to polarity and manifestations. This is called the 4 double. And then we have 9, which is the enad, which is the ultimate expression of something. It is the boundary between the finite and the infinite. Okay. 9 is a very, very spiritual number. And then we have 10, which is the decad, and it represents completion or complete perfection. It harmonizes all numbers that come before it. Okay. Now, everything in existence has a pattern, and that pattern would help you create a specific effect or outcome because each shape holds a frequency. Okay. Now we're getting into why is this important? Let me repeat that. Everything in existence has a pattern, and that pattern will help you to create an effect or an outcome, because each shape holds a frequency, which we learned in the last episode that a frequency is a color between red and violet. Now, shapes emit energy, or what has been referred to as carrier-like radio waves that carry sound information. If you want to look into this, research micro vibrational physics, okay, because this is going to tell you. But apparently the quality of these carrier-like radio waves creates very strong communication properties, which promote resonance within the higher realms. This is why a lot of spiritual tools are triangles or pyramids, okay? And why most churches have domes incorporated in the structure. So when we sit within these shapes, for example, let's just say a pyramid, right? Because when we're sitting in meditation, we're sitting in the shape of a pyramid. And that shape is vibrating higher than us, we will start to match the vibration because we have a biofield or electromagnetic field around us that is influenced by our environment. That's why it's important to choose who is around you, because you can become them energetically if you're constantly around them. Okay, same thing happens with shapes. I don't know if y'all are on this side of TikTok, but there's a side of TikTok where there's a lot of spiritual people, and they have like this copper triangle that they wear on their head. When you first see it, it's just like, what the fuck are you doing? But when you actually understand this information, it's a healing tool. You can also buy one of those huge copper triangles and put it around your bed. Okay. And if you sleep underneath it, your frequency will start to match the frequency of that triangle. Okay. It's also why the pyramids were designed. Okay. The pyramids are designed in a triangle. And I literally just posted a video about this on TikTok where a guy said that he had back pain and he had been in an accident. Nobody was able to help him. Him and his dad frequented ancient Egypt, and they got to be in the king's chamber alone. And when they went into the king's chamber, I guess, I don't know what happened, but he started to see like I can't remember what he said, but he started to see something. And all of a sudden when he left there, his back pain was gone. People don't know this, but the pyramids, not only were they associated with the king, right? And they helped the king align with the sun god Ra, but they were healing centers. Okay. They were healing centers. They also had healing centers that literally look like the inside of your ear. Okay. Sound frequency. Okay, we came here to this realm to experience a wide array of sound frequency, and everything has its own frequency. That's why I say everything has its own consciousness, everything has its own aura. So do shapes. And a lot of us don't know that. We need to know that. And that's why I'm doing this series, and we're going to do the next couple of episodes on sacred geometry, because people don't know that. Okay. So yeah, but that's why things are structured the way that they are structured, because shapes hold frequency. All right. Also, if you go look at that video that I posted about the guy who traveled to ancient Egypt and he went to the king's chamber in the pyramids of Giza and he was healed, right? He's also one of those scientists who will pour like salt on a table and play a frequency, and you can see a geometric shape start to form depending on what frequency you're playing. It's really, really interesting, especially if you understand that we live in this emotional spectrum. If you understand that we're here to experience sound frequency or vibration, which also organizes itself using geometry. All of it organizes itself using geometry, and you get to actually just see a live representation of that. I recommend you go watch it, just because when you're not familiar with something and something hasn't been brought into your awareness, you're not going to learn a lot of information about it first. We cannot perceive what we have not seen ourselves. So just go watch the video. Go watch this, like start looking into this information, because you bring awareness to it, right? And when your mind aligns with the frequency of this information, you'll start to get downloads about that information. Okay. So start putting what I'm teaching you guys in practice, like right now. Okay, now geometry is at the foundation of consciousness and our very existence. All of these things that we are studying are connected, okay? Planets are circles, which hold frequency, and they emit light that influences the biofield around us anytime they get closer to us. So anytime they get close to the earth, we are influenced by them, okay? They also influence our personality based on when, where, and what time we were born, okay? Where the planets were in the sky when we were born. Numbers help to organize the universe, along with geometry, the shapes or the forms and the patterns that the frequencies of these numbers create when they expand or come together. All of these sciences have to do with creation, existence, and consciousness. Okay. If you want to understand anything, we have to understand all of these in the same way that the ancients did. Okay. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to rediscover what has been hidden from us. Okay. So that is why I'm teaching astrology, numerology, and sacred geometry, because they literally set the fucking foundation for everything that we're trying to understand about ourselves, for everything we're trying to understand about consciousness. And if you're a spiritual person, you need to understand these basic fucking concepts in order for you to start getting downloads about this information. Okay, in order for you to expand your awareness around these concepts. I am an avid promoter of learning as much as you possibly can, because with knowledge comes power. Knowledge is the key to everything. Actually, knowledge is the key, but wisdom is the door that you're trying to open. Okay. Wisdom is the application of knowledge and understanding. Okay. Mind, body, soul. That's what that's talking about. Knowledge, which is the mind, body, which is the emotions. Okay. Your emotions add depth to your experience. They help you to process the knowledge that you are receiving through your five senses, whether you hear it, you see it, you smell it, you taste it, you touch it. Okay. Or you get intuition about it, you get discernment about it. The emotions help you to perceive it. And then when you know better, you have to do better. Your actions should align with what you know and what you understand. Okay. So that's what I'm trying to help us do. And I hope y'all, I hope the people who are watching this, and I only care about the people who care about this information. I don't care about this expanding past the people who need to hear this. Okay. But that is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I really want us to get a fundamental understanding of who we are. And a lot of us just don't know, because we don't understand what we need to understand. We've been taught a bunch of shit that do not fucking matter. Okay. So here's some examples of what shapes or universal pattern designs everything in our universe. And we'll also get deeper into most of these shapes, okay, in other episodes. So we have the torus field. Why is the torus field important? Because that is what I've shown you guys many, many times. The electricity versus magnetism, meeting in the point of inertia in the middle, okay? Torus field is around everything in nature. Vesica Pisces is very, very important, which is about duality. It's about polarity, right? Okay. The flower of life, which from the flower of life, we get the tree of life, the fruit of life, the seed of life. Okay. Those can be found in ancient civilizations across the fucking world. Okay. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. In every ancient civilization we can think of, you see one of these elements, okay? The Merkaba, which surrounds us, okay? The Merkaba is important because the Merkaba can protect you, and you can create a Merkaba around you to astral travel. Astral traveling just helps you prepare for death, but it also helps you talk to beings that are not of this universe, who can help you to understand things that you may not understand on your own. Okay. Metatron's cube. Okay. The Merkaba, I meant to say that's been found everywhere too. The hexagram has been found everywhere. Metatron's cube, really, really important. The pentagonal star, or I'm gonna fuck this up, so just bear with me. Jesus, I'm nervous. My pits are sweating. Okay, it's called icosahedron. Maybe. Okay. And then go to mean spiral. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about phi. We're going to talk about the Fibonacci spiral, all of that. Okay. Now, that concludes what I want to teach you guys today. Because again, I just want to touch the surface of this. We're going to go into deep detail as we continue on. That's the end of our episode. We'll spend the next couple weeks talking about shapes that are created everywhere in nature, because we need to start talking about the torus field, which is one of the shapes, again, that forms around us. It's very, very important for you to have a strong torus field. And for it to be in balance, because if it's not in balance and you're not in balance, you're in survival mode, you're fucking fighting for your motherfucking life every day. Okay. I hope this episode was informative. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, I love y'all deep.